Hey, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Today, we're going to be talking about Mao Zedong and his leadership in China from 1949 to 1976. He's going to usher in a wave of communism, and we're really going to talk about his leadership and compare him to Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union. Due at the end of this session is the completed ED puzzle with all of the different short answer questions along the way, and one final SAQ at the end of this ED puzzle. Okay, if you have any questions, please reach out to your teachers. We are here to help. You can text us or email us. And just big reminder that tomorrow, Thursday, you guys will be having a quiz on decolonization in India and China. All right, so let's get started today. Here we go. Let's do a little please do first. I'm going to ask you guys to do some of the matching, and I'm going to read aloud what's going on in Russia, because our goal today is to really compare the Soviet Union with the leadership of Joseph Stalin to that of Mao Zedong. We want to have a strong footing of who was Joseph Stalin and what did communism look like in the Soviet Union. So please take out your notebooks and title it 4/1/2020, Mao in China, as you can see here on the top right. Have your notebook out ready to take notes during the presentation. So here we go. Let's do some matching. You guys have 1 minute. I'm going to put a timer on my phone to complete the matching, and then I'm going to read aloud the section at the bottom about what communism looks like in the Soviet Union. Okay, 1 minute timer set. Ten seconds remaining. Okay, let's continue. And I'm going to go from the do now reading. So as I read, I'm going to ask you guys to chart down on your notebook some different tactics that the leaders used, Stalin and Lenin, in the Soviet Union to usher in communism. So here we go. What was Russia like? Think about SPICE: social, political, interaction with the environment, cultural, economic. Russia. By 1914, Russia was far behind Western Europe economically and technologically. It was slowly building an industrial base with foreign capital and increasing agricultural production. However, it was still dominated by a small and wealthy aristocracy, imperial court and bureaucracy, and rigid censorship enforced by the state police. Despite public unrest, Tsar Nicholas II retained all executive power and had little interest in broadening the base of his government to include the rising middle class. The losses and fruitless sacrifices of World War I led to disorder and riots in March of 1917. The Tsar was forced to abdicate, and a professional Republican government took power. The liberal government decided to stay in the war, resulting in food shortages, revolts, and continued strikes. The leading party of communists, the Bolsheviks, was led by Vladimir Lenin. They promised the people exactly what they wanted: peace, land, and bread. In November 1917, Lenin's party seized power and declared Russia the world's first socialist state. In early 1918, it made peace with Germany, ending Russia's part in the war. The Bolshevik government seized all private land, banks, and industries. The former owners were persecuted and their estates looted and burned. Soviets or popular committees ruled locally under command of the Central Party. The Cheka, which is the secret police, spied on and arrested anyone who deviated from revolutionary enthusiasm. Marx had said communism was designed for developed states like Germany and Britain, where the industrial working class would seize and freely share the capital that fueled their production. There was nothing in Marx about how to communize a society like Russia that was largely agricultural and pre-industrial. The Bolshevik solution, a society like Russia, a Bolshevik solution called Marxism-Leninism, called for dictatorial central direction by a single party until industry, national wealth, and communist thought had developed enough for the state to wither away. In 1924, Lenin died and Joseph Stalin came to power. Stalin instituted his 5-year plans with the goals of increasing industrial and agricultural productivity. Individual farms were collectivized, and over 5 million who resisted were killed. An intensive program of heavy industrialization was begun. Education and basic health care were universal and free. Women were given equal rights under the law, and organized religion was suppressed in favor of official atheism. At the same time, civil rights were non-existent. Until the 1950s, the Communist Party used state terror and purges to enforce submission. Hundreds of thousands were tried and executed, and millions were imprisoned in a vast network of deadly labor camps. For several decades, this aspect of communism was denied or minimized, and Soviet propaganda seemed to offer a glimpse of a future that works to Marxist true believers around the world. Please pause my video now to answer the do now questions in the margin. Okay, great. So today, what we're really going to be doing is making sure that we are comparing Joseph Stalin's leadership to Mao. And some talking business quick hits that I would like you guys to know is, again, due at the end of class is the completed ed puzzle with the video questions answered along the way. Please reach out to your teachers if you're having difficulty. And we have a quiz tomorrow that will be sent out this afternoon regarding decolonization in India and China. So just framing our learning, after World War II, we start to see now the rise of nations declaring themselves independent and decolonizing during what was economic imperialism happening in the 1800s and then early 1900s. We talked already about India with Mohandas Gandhi leading Indian independence and finally achieving that in 1947. But his dreams deferred in many ways as we saw that India became a home for Hindus and a new country, Pakistan, was created for Muslims, not the vision that Gandhi had for India, okay? And today we're really going to dive into China in 1949 to look at what is happening with the leadership of Mao Zedong and how China has ultimately changed over the course of the 20th century from being a colonized territory owned by the French to now a communist country. So that's our goal for class today, is to really look at and study this man named Mao Zedong. Did you know that if you Google Chinese currency today, you will actually find that on Chinese currency, you will see Mao Zedong everywhere. We want to figure out, does Mao Zedong deserve to be this hero for the Chinese people? How does he compare to Stalin? And what do you think his legacy should be? Okay, so I'm just asking us to read this aim. Students will be able to identify major features of Mao's China in order to compare him to Stalin and other revolutionary leaders if you want to push yourself there, and to assess whether he deserves to be on all of the Chinese currency. So let's get started a little bit with some rundown on some stats and some propaganda. So let's just look at a couple images of Mao. So in 1949, we're actually going to see, and you can see in the animated video here, that communism spreads. And it starts really in the rural countryside where through the Long March, Mao Zedong will organize peasants around a revolt for land redistribution, for rights of the peasant population. And he wins. And in 1949, officially China is now named the People's Republic of China, and Mao Zedong is the leader. So I want to take a peek at some of the propaganda that Mao is going to use. And I want you guys just to think, how does this compare to Stalin and Hitler even? What might be the goal? Right, so looking at the bottom left picture, I see here this kind of hammer. I see in the bottom right some smashings of different Buddhist temples, of books, of Christian dialects or books as well. Right, in the top right, we see Mao, and he's being celebrated by all these different people cheering and chanting for him, people who are uniformed men, people who are pilots, people who are women, children. And then we see here a woman with this little red book in her hand, kind of paving the way and saving the way. We see all these farms in the background, thinking about what Mao's goal might be. Right, what messaging is Mao trying to send people through his propaganda? Now we're going to take a look at both Stalin and Hitler just to compare. So I want you guys in your notebooks right now to pause me and I'm sorry, in fact, you're going to pause me and you'll see that there's a question that's popping up on the right to compare and contrast propaganda used by Mao and other revolutionary leaders, right? Do you find that there are more similarities or differences in the type of propaganda and quite possibly the goals of these leaders? Pause the video now, please. So here we go. We just looked at some Maoist propaganda. We're really starting to see his use of children, the restructuring of industry, and also looking at his agricultural campaign of what he's going to specifically do with farming throughout China. So I want to take you guys through a little bit of lecture and some documents where we're really going to make sure that we answer this aim, comparing Mao's China to other revolutionary leaders and assessing whether he deserves to be on all the Chinese currency. So in your notebooks, we're going to start with a little bit of a lecture, okay, regarding Mao. He is that first leader in 1949 to coin himself kind of a communist leader. He is China's boss from 1949 to 1976, a very long time. And we want to figure out what did he do in power and how is that similar or different. So Mao's goals really were multifaceted in many ways. He ultimately wanted to reshape Chinese society into a communist China by purging the country of capitalism and Western ideas. So prior to China's kind of in Mao's mind, rebirth in 1949. They were owned by a French colony and dictated by Western demands and Western ideals, Western style of dress, Western education, and even remembering, in the 1800s with the Opium Wars, China really being split apart with the spheres of influence. So in Mao's mind, he felt that China had lost themselves to these imperial powers. And so he wanted to rid the country of anything that represented capitalism and Western ideas. He called these the 4 O's. Get rid of old customs, old habits, old culture, old mindsets to pave a way for this idea of communism. And so some of the big things that he did, and you can see it in this timeline that I'm about to pull up. This is a timeline of everything he did from 1949 to 1976. And I really want to key in. Feel free to pause me at any time if you want to look deeper at this timeline. But I want to key in on deaths from famine during the Great Leap Forward, 20 million or more, and then deaths during the Cultural Revolution. We're going to look at 2 of those actions today in class to understand a little bit more about what was Mao doing while in power and how does this compare to Stalin. So the first thing we need to know is that Mao created something called the Great Leap Forward. So in 1958, we start to see agriculturally a demand for more food and production to fit the population of China. So in Mao's mind, he created this idea called the Great Leap Forward, which is an economic campaign whereby which the land that was initially distributed back to peasants in 1946 was now taken back by the government. So now the state owned all of the land and created communes. So they took the land away from the peasants that they gained, and now it is state controlled. And peasants were asked or forced to live on these communes to grow food, and then the excess food would go to the government to then distribute to everybody equally. This did not help advance agriculture in China. It actually, in fact, did the opposite. So it's often known as the Great Leap Forward, but I would like to coin it the Great Leap backwards. Okay, 45 million people died as a result of the Great Leap backwards. And you can start to see here on this map that ultimately in 1960, you have the death rate at its peak with the lowest amount of calories per day. So there was not enough food to sustain the population, and therefore we saw it lead to famine and death. So I'm going to play a video that highlights a little bit from further what's going on with the Great Leap Forward, and I'm going to ask you guys to watch it on the next slide and to take notes in your notebook.
In 1958, Mao launched his campaign, the Great Leap Forward. China the industrial equal of Western nations in just 15 years. His method was to mobilize the entire country to work day and night by promising a better future. Mao's word was so powerful that almost almost overnight, people's communes sprang up across China. A commune encompassed many villages with thousands of families. Each day was strictly regimented, and family life was virtually abolished. Children used in communal nurseries while their parents worked around the clock. People ate in the fields or in communal dining halls. To increase industrial output, communes were ordered to make steel. People collected logs, pots, bed frames, and tools, anything made of iron or steel. They built small furnaces to melt them. The biggest challenge was to keep the furnaces fueled.
At night, you could see many furnaces along the railroad. Fire shot out of the furnaces.
But the steel people made was useless.
People were unhappy, but nobody dared say anything. The result was that everything made of iron and steel was taken from every family and was made useless.
While the government called on everyone to make steel, they also wanted to increase farm output.
How could we increase the grain harvest?
During the Great Leap Forward, we believed miracles could happen. There was a saying, the corn will grow higher the more you desire. Communes and schools reported their wonderful news to the party. If one commune said they could turn out 150 tons an acre, another one would say their target was 180 tons. Each commune or school would promise a higher amount until the last school gave their highest figure. Our school set the target of 470 tons an acre. We dug a hole, something like a swimming pool. We thought if we put all the fertilizer in it, we would achieve our target. Then we poured the seeds in, which filled up into a layer about this thick. There was a photograph in the People's Daily that showed the wheat in a field supporting the weight of children.
Some leaders of the Central Party Committee were so happy that they put this photo on their desks at work. Most people believed it.
We were surprised to see that photo and wondered how it could be possible. But because we were city people, we couldn't be sure it was a fake.
After the anti-rightist campaign, few dared to ask questions.
Later, I learned it was all fake. The peasants were putting on a show for us. They moved grain from other places and put it all in one field. It was all a show for Mao.
Under pressure to produce more, to launch satellites to heaven, as it was called, party officials inflated production figures. An ominous cycle began as the state took more and more grain based on false figures, leaving the peasants with nothing to eat. By the summer of 1959, the leaders knew the Great Leap Forward was going badly wrong. After his trip, Mao decided to moderate production.
Okay, now pause me and you're going to answer the SAQ question or short answer question on the side. Not only do we have Mao leading the Great Leap Forward, in many ways the Great Leap Backwards, this attempt to increase production of food grain agriculturally through the use of communes that led to devastating numbers of famine, he also, again, going back to the 4 O's, wanted to rid China of capitalism and Western mindsets. And he led something called the Cultural Revolution in 1957 to 1960. And what he did in many ways was it was the People's Liberation of Army of China was a great school for Mao Zedong thought. So he's really going to start to turn to the youth in order to ensure that he gets rid of this Western mindset. I'm going to talk us through a little bit of the Cultural Revolution by reading some documents, watching a video to really understand to what extent should Mao be on the Chinese currency, and then how do we start to see his actions being reminiscent or different from Stalin. So let's dive into kind of the first document here that we're going to talk about a little bit further with the red guard. So Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution. I'm going to ask you guys in your notebooks to summarize the main idea of each document to determine if Mao deserves to be China's hero. Push your thinking by comparing his actions to Stalin and sourcing the document. Okay, please pause me now. So what we should have noticed a little bit too in some of these images in the Cultural Revolution is that it is an attack on Western thought and ideology to get rid of it from China and to usher in this new wave of communist thought. And so who did Mao specifically target? Were the youths. And we started to see 11 million people joining what was called the Red Guard. So the Red Guard was the People's Liberation Army. It was Mao's army dedicated to fulfilling the missions of Mao, almost maybe in many ways kind of like a secret police. They were in fact required to carry this little red book. You can see it in their hands. This little red book was a book of sayings by Mao. And at any point in time, a member of the Red Guard could be stopped and asked to recite a line from memory from the book. And if they were unable to do that, they were seen as disloyal. So this is a heightened time period of blind loyalty and faith to Mao Zedong, and he was able to fulfill a lot of his mission and stay in power from 1949 to 1976 through the Red Guard, which again was his army of about roughly 11 million people. So let's read a little bit further or watch a video actually right now regarding the Cultural Revolution. What happened? What did the Little Red Guard do in order to carry out Mao's mission? What impact did that have? And how is this similar or different to Stalin?
Those of us who have never been through it, China's Cultural Revolution was part of the social political movement that took place in China from 1966 to 1976. To many of those,
I'm so sorry.
cultural elements from Chinese society. But what this movement really was Mao Zedong's selfish attempt to get rid of his rivals in government and to revive his image to the Chinese people after it was soiled due to his campaign called the Great Leap Forward. Now, that campaign ended up creating the largest famine in human history and killing somewhere between 18 and 43 million people. But we will dive into the Great Leap Forward at another time. Now, the Cultural Revolution started off with a campaign to cast away the four O's. The four O's are old ideas, culture, customs, and habits. Basically, this was books and art being destroyed, museums ransacked, and streets renamed with new revolutionary names, and adorned with pictures and sayings of Mao Zedong everywhere. Mao Zedong wanted to eradicate religion first and foremost because without a belief system, the Chinese people are more easily swayed to believe basically whatever he tells them. Many famous temples, really old traditional shrines, and other historical heritage sites were destroyed. Today, when you go to China, most of the temples and the old historic sites that you see were actually recreated because most of them were destroyed during the Cultural Revolution or the period before that. The second thing Mao wanted to eradicate was education because he believed that people who are educated have the ability to think for themselves. And that can't be allowed. So in the Cultural Revolution, intellectuals bore the brunt of the attacks. Teachers being beaten to death with belt buckles, physically tortured, forced to wear dunce hats, bow down and admit their mistakes, were sent to prison. And these prisons were actually called cow sheds. Now, keep in mind that the people carrying out these attacks of terror were the Red Guards, consisting of mainly students, and many of them still in elementary and middle school. So a lot of times, the students carried out the torture or even killed their own teachers. They were basically like Mao's private army of terrorists. And some might say, well, how can they do that? Why are these young people so evil? Well, you have to think about it like this. When asked today why they carried out all these horrid attacks, a lot of former Red Guards said, well, that was the social norm at that time. When you went to school, that's where you got the orders to go carry out an assault or go ransack a home. And that was what schools were. Now, during the Cultural Revolution, Mao singled out 9 categories of enemies that he wanted people to target. The first one was landlords, the second, rich peasants, the third, counter-revolutionaries, the fourth, bad elements, the fifth, rightists, the sixth, traitors, the seventh, former agents, the eighth, capitalist rollers, and ninth was he wanted to target more specifically than any other was intellectuals. And these are not clearly defined, as in what exactly is a counter-revolutionary or a bad element. People were accused of being class enemies for doing the simplest of things, like forgetting a slogan from the Little Red Book, wearing Western clothing, seeking repayment of a debt, or hoarding a piece of meat. These all are considered violations, and you could be tortured for something as simple as that. All this chaos basically created an environment in China where basically everybody is all the time, because you could be accusing someone today, but tomorrow somebody could be accusing you of being a bad element, and you're the one who was arrested and tortured. This also created opportunities for people to hurt each other by reporting false information about each other because of a private vendetta or something related to that. The worst thing is this happened amongst family members, and you would have children being told to spy on their parents to see if they said something bad. What our leader said pretty much sums it up. Chairman Mao has defined our future as an armed revolutionary youth organization. So is Chairman Mao is our great the world red, and then the whole universe.
Thinking about this, especially as high school students, what it might have been like to live and possibly be part of the Red Guard, it was all encompassing. Mao did a great job of manipulating and using education to teach a new style of thinking and then use these youth to fulfill his mission. So not only did we see that he attempted to industrialize with his own 5-year plans, he attempted to increase grain production with the Great Leap Forward, but now we start to see he's going to try to change the mindset and the culture of China through this cultural revolution, really attacking anyone who was anti-communist or posed a threat to his power and his position, namely those intellectuals. So it definitely was a heightened time of fear during this time period. And so I want us to read one more document specifically from a woman who can account what it was like to be part of the Cultural Revolution. So, please read this document and then answer the short answer question after. Okay, however, one thing that's a little harder, challenging for me to understand is the role of women in communist countries. So what we're going to see on this next page are two documents. The top left one is from China, a poster that was created specifically about birth control and women. And then the bottom right is really just looking at specifically what was happening in the Soviet Union to compare. But I want you guys to take a minute to really look at the poster in the top left of what is this saying about women and the rights of women in communist countries? And how does that maybe challenge what you initially thought communism might do for women? So let's do this summarizer. We have now seen in Mao all of these actions that he took in regards to his treatment of women, in regards to the Great Leap Forward, his 5-year plans, and the Cultural Revolution. Also, he did create this new republic in 1949 through the wishes of the people. Maybe he strayed far away from that, but that's up to you to kind of decide. So I would like you guys to answer these two questions. Do you believe that Mao deserves to be China's hero and represented on their currency? To what extent do you think that Mao is similar to Stalin? And I'm going to ask you guys to go back to your do now that we read with your notes on SPICE to understand how maybe those actions of these leaders are similar or different. Two last things left to do. We have a little guided practice with some multiple choice questions to check for understanding, and then we'll end with our exit ticket. So last but not least, we have 4 multiple choice questions that I'm going to ask you guys to answer that summarizes our lesson today about Mao. And last but not least, we see the rise of Joseph Stalin after Vladimir Lenin in the 1920s in the Soviet Union, and we see the rise of Mao Zedong in China in 1949. What led to that? Why did it all begin? Both leaders bringing in communism. Their actions may be similar, maybe they're different. Your ask here is to write an introduction that responds to this prompt below, making sure to include context and a strong evaluative thesis with 3 supporting claims. So here's our prompt. Develop an argument that evaluates similarities between Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong. Please don't forget, in an introduction, we start with blank all started with, more specifically, this then led to, then our thesis overall. Thank you guys so much for a great class. Please feel free to leave any comments or questions that you have so I can answer them as we go through. Have a great afternoon.